I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting of June 23rd, 2025. Christina, would you please call the roll?
Chair Mitchell,
Here.
Vice Chair Najak,
Here.
Diana Moreno is absent today. Rigby,
Here.
Commissioner Sly is also absent today. Commissioner Twing is not yet here. James Bruce,
Here.
Thank you. Item number 3 on tonight's agenda is the City Council update. Christina, do we have City Council liaison on Zoom?
not today.
Thank you. Item number 4 was supposed to be approval of the minutes from June 9th, 2025, but we're going to bump that to next week's next meeting's agenda and review and approve those meetings. Item number 5 on tonight's agenda is public comment. Christina, do we have anyone here that wishes to provide public comment or raise an issue regarding items that are not on the agenda tonight?
None today.
Thank you. Item number 6 is the Commission for Citizen Involvement general updates. I don't think I have any general updates this week that I saw. So let's move on from that, and that'll just bring us straight to item number 7.1 on tonight's agenda. The work session number 2 for the Foothills District Plan update, PP 25-0005. We're going to receive an overview and status update on the process to update the Foothills District Plan, and I'll turn it over to Long Range Planning Manager, Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. And yeah, thank you, Planning Commissioners. Really just wanted to take an opportunity today to provide you all with an update, sort of an overview on what we've been doing for some revisitation of some work that the city had began about a decade and a half ago in the Foothills neighborhood. So we had talked about this a bit in the context of the housing production strategy implementation back in May, but I just wanted to focus a little bit more on this work since you all hadn't had an introduction, and I was hoping that, or you are all planned at least to be involved with this work moving forward. So yeah, I wanted to give you a sense of what to expect. So I'll talk a little bit about the context of the area, some of those prior planning efforts from 2012, what we called the Foothills District Framework Plan at that point. I'll talk about what we're looking at accomplishing with the current scope of work and the schedule for that work and what to expect moving forward. So the Foothills District, as I'm sure you are aware, or at least partially aware, is relatively close to where we are right now. It's across Highway 43 between the 43 and the Willamette River, sort of generally bounded by the Birds Hill neighborhood to the north, downtown to the west, Willamette River to the east, and Old Town to the south. So it's about 107 acres in size in total, with about a quarter of that dedicated to industrial use. That's generally the area of the district that we'll be focusing these efforts on, though there is more going on in this district too. So there's some commercial area, particularly the sort of Oswego Place shopping center with the Whole Foods and everything. There's some open space and parks, really great sort of prize park that's a recent addition to the city's sort of parks inventory with the Foothills Park itself, and some other really nice areas down in this part of the city that in order to get to, you do go through that industrial area, so you can see that there's kind of, it's in a weird, I guess, state right now with a very beautiful park, some nice residences. The Oswego Point apartments in particular are currently developed, so there's some commercial, some residential, industrial, and kind of on the other side of the industrial is a lovely park that was recently invested in by the city. So you can see a bit of an overview of the district as it was envisioned with the previous planning effort back in 2012. This was a planning effort that was actually initiated by some property owners in the area, in the industrial area of the city. It was not a city-initiated plan necessarily. This is something that was advanced generally between 2011 and 2012 to promote mixed-use residential and commercial development in that industrial core of the area. As you can see, it did envision the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant to remain in its current location. You can see that on the upper right, and that is another important element of this area of the city. The plan really at this time was to extend the Portland streetcar down to Lake Oswego. I'm sure you heard about this in the news. And at one point, the plan was revised to actually remove that streetcar prior to, I think, the adoption of the plan. So the plan that was adopted by the city does not technically include the streetcar, but there are some mixed-use residential buildings that I think, to a degree, the success and sort of financial necessities of that type of construction would have really depended on the streetcar. So in some ways, it was no longer quite as achievable after the streetcar was removed. However, generally speaking, the city really revisited this idea. I think there was a lot of political backlash, more or less, against this plan. So, back in 2012, this effort was essentially halted. The city had actually gone through the effort not only of doing this plan, but also developing an urban renewal plan, which would be a really specific sort of plan for infrastructure investments in the city to be funded by tax increment financing. So about $43 million in public investments was envisioned as a part of this plan. And both of those things were both kind of repealed just 2 months after they were passed, or 2 months after the urban renewal plan was passed. So I think it's known as one of the most short-lived urban renewal plans in state history. But essentially, there was a desire in terms of the political leadership at that time to change priorities in this area, and more or less, development has stalled in this area in the time since then. So just to kind of flesh out what folks were thinking of when they did the original planning effort, and this was the 2011 framework plan, so this is when it included the streetcar. You can see that the streetcar sort of in the right side of the image there. And this is a rendering that depicts the quote-unquote Willamette steps. It was envisioned to be somewhat of a Spanish step style sort of grand entrance between the downtown Lake Oswego area and the Foothills neighborhood. And of course, it would be activated with more shopping and residential uses. In addition to multiple types of transportation, as you can see, bikes, pedestrians, cars, and streetcar. So that was all kind of included in this plan. One thing you might note is that these buildings are 5 stories. That is something that generally isn't allowed in most areas of downtown without a variance or without some type of unique circumstance. And so you can see it was relatively higher density, I suppose, than some of the rest of the city at that point in time. So, as I mentioned, really in that area, nothing has transpired more or less in the decade or so since then, but one important development that's still sort of in the works is the potential relocation of the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant, which, as you can see on the sort of map, its current location. Outlined in that map in red is the potential location of a new Tryon Creek wastewater treatment facility, or what we're calling just the wastewater treatment plant at this point, or WWTF, wastewater treatment facility. We're not sure exactly what the name will be, but that's the envisioned site for the redesigned treatment plant. The deal has not been finalized, but there are a lot of there's a lot of work in progress to essentially, transfer the operations of the treatment plant to this new site, and then, the former site would be decommissioned and would be potentially, available for reuse or redevelopment eventually if there was, some type of remediation and sort of the proper efforts that would need to occur at that site for that to happen. So, this is actually somewhat of an opportunity. Of course, that new location of the treatment plant is unfortunately right in the middle of kind of what was envisioned as some of the major sort of circulation and access points to the district. As you can see in this image, one of the main access roads would come straight through that site. So it does kind of complicate what was passed back in 2012 in this plan. And it also presents some new opportunities as well. So the transportation that was envisioned would have to change, but that sort of former site is larger than the new site. So it was formerly on a 14-acre site, and they're moving to a 6-acre site. So it'd be smaller, a little bit more compact, and potentially open up some additional land for planning. So for different uses that could be envisioned in this area, potentially park or some type of extension of the existing park at least, as well as other things similar to what have been envisioned in the past. At least some residential, I think, is kind of what we're thinking at this point. But of course, we want to open it up to a large community process and talk about it. So basically, this work with the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant, the relocation of that facility, caused the city to realize we're going to have to revisit this plan. Maybe this makes sense to look into this, and it is really, in a large sort of broad sense, one of the last pieces of underdeveloped land in the city. If you're looking towards housing production and our housing needs, which we are required to do so by the state, this is a high opportunity site. So as I mentioned, the context related to the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant has changed. Really not much in the area has been developed since 2012. Basically, the new the urban renewal plan would have to be revisited in order for anything to actually take place down there. So while the Foothills District Framework Plan is technically adopted, there's nothing sort of actionable about it currently. And while we didn't include the update to the urban renewal plan within the scope of work for the RFP, we do envision that it would take place essentially on a parallel track. That's something that, unfortunately, the city's redevelopment manager stepped down over sort of winter break, right before the new year this year. So they're still looking for a replacement, but generally speaking, when that individual has been found, that new employee, they would be helping to take on that work, and it is something that would be sort of taking place after the draft framework plan has already been developed, sort of to be consistent with what is in that plan. So anyway, it's still possible that this will all align. We are envisioning doing this, just not as this part of the RFP itself. Another sort of big change is housing and just sort of housing policy within the city. As I'm sure you've all recognized, affordable housing has become a little bit more of a priority in recent years for the city, and that's resulted in about 186 units of affordable housing since 2018. So really, that's become a little bit more of a priority, and to sort of further sort of codify that as a priority for the city, there was a strategy within the HPS that we adopted last year that would require the city, or that does require the city, to utilize tax increment financing to support affordable housing development in this area. I guess it's technically to utilize a Foothills urban renewal plan and tax increment financing to support affordable housing. The specific location of the affordable housing is not specified, but that is the strategy, some type of funding for affordable housing through TIF from this district. Additionally, sort of the housing production strategy, which of course is aimed at increasing the amount of developable, buildable land within the city, also identified a strategy to rezone land. So this is also something that we envision to be a piece of that larger rezoning strategy, a rezoning in this area of the city, which had been, contemplated previously anyway. So of course, we're a little bit more cognizant of our housing need and the number of units that we need to get there. So that's something that's on our minds as we look at this area of the city and revisit it right now. So speaking, of this current effort, as I mentioned, there's really a desire from City Council to get this going and to envision a plan that works with the sort of relocation of that Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant. There is there's a 2025 council initiative to begin the update of this plan. It actually started last year when there was a 2024 initiative to begin working on this. The city in that time has been awarded with a grant from Metro for $745,000 through an intergovernmental agreement. That's through Metro Planning and Development grant that staff applied for last year. That's been finalized at this point. The city issued an RFP in March. We received some responses in April. And in the time since then, we've issued our intent to award and have actually approved a contract to work with a consultant team led by a consultant named First 40 Feet, or a firm named First 40 Feet. to do this work. So it's actually a much larger consultant team with a number of different sub-consultants, but it will be led by First 40 Feet in addition to Eco Northwest, the Bookin Group, Apex, although I believe they were called something very different on the engineering side. But anyway, there's a lot of firms with a lot of experience in this area. First 40 Feet has some good experience in this area, but they're a bit of a emerging small business. So they have some great experience, but a lot of their experience is in the sort of Vancouver side of the region. So we might not just be as familiar with it in the south side of the region, I guess. So it's a good opportunity for us to work with a new consultant team, get sort of fresh perspective on things, which I think is appropriate for what we're doing. In terms of the deliverables, we're really looking for a number of things from the consultant. This will be a long sort of process. It will be work that we're going to be doing up until the end of 2027. And it will involve the sort of deliverables you see on the screen. First, we're going to come to the Planning Commission and talk about a public involvement strategy. So we had some initial ideas for this when we issued the RFP, but we'll be working with the consultant team to actually flesh out and develop a more robust public engagement strategy or public involvement strategy to talk with you all about in August, actually. So that's the next step that we'll be here and discussing that with the Planning Commission. Of course, part of this public involvement strategy is to appoint a community advisory committee and a technical advisory committee. Technical advisory committee would be more of an oversight, sort of technical input role, as opposed to the community advisory committee, which would be sort of tasked with making formal recommendations to Planning Commission and City Council. We just last week, I think I mentioned we did have the RFP contract approved on June 17th. We also had the council approve a resolution to create this community advisory committee. So we hope to begin soliciting membership for that in the coming week or so. And yeah, that will of course be a part of that public involvement strategy. There is a next step really to do a lot of inventory and analysis and take stock of what is in the area currently. Of course, we did a lot of that work back in 2012, so not much of that has changed in that time since then. But we do want to make sure that we account for everything that's going on, particularly with the new wastewater treatment plan. So that will be an opportunity to sort of take stock of all the sort of existing conditions in the area related to, it's basically everything. This is really looking into a very in-depth infrastructure analysis in addition to what we do sort of typically at the Planning Commission related to land use and zoning. So this is a much more involved, I guess, project than what we've been talking about at the Planning Commission in the last few years, really. It's been kind of policy-oriented lately, and this is really going to be into the details, very specifically, how is it going to get funded, when is it going to happen, what does that look like? So a lot more sort of realistic in the medium term, I guess you could say, shorter term than some of the work we've been doing. I think a really important step here, though, is to take another look at what the goals and objectives and sort of vision for this area will be. And of course, we'll use that 2012 plan as a starting point, but really want to have a unique and really representative take on what the community, how the community feels about that area and what should happen there and sort of what the city's priorities should be. So again, we really are looking to this consultant to develop some unique community engagement ideas for this piece. We'll be doing a number of in-person events this time. A lot of the events that we've been holding for the past few years have been remote, but in addition to them being in person, I think we'll have some sort of creative ways for folks to express their opinions on what should happen in that area. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in August. Then we'll kind of work through different alternatives. So we'll have about 4 higher level concept alternatives to begin with that we'll be working through, trying to sort of flesh out, not too much, but just trying to figure out the feasibility of those different options, but really just want to produce those for discussion. We'll, based on sort of preferences and what we hear discussing the concept plan alternatives, we'll then further refine those into schematic level alternatives, about 2 of those. And those will eventually become the preferred plan schematic and the final framework plan, draft and then final framework plan. So iterative work to kind of make sure that all the sort of pieces of infrastructure are being accounted for, and that all these different concept and schematic plan alternatives function and don't have any sort of fatal flaws in terms of the engineering design or anything like that, but also are feasible and economically make sense from developers pro forma type of perspective. So that is actually one element that Eco Northwest added to the consultant team that we selected, that we really appreciated, that sort of iterative look at economic feasibility and making sure that we don't end up with an alternative that is not possible. I think particularly with what we've seen at the North Anchor site, the city is interested in plans that are achievable and are something that we feel confident will be constructed. So of course, once we get this framework plan, the framework plan is actually something that would be passed by City Council as opposed to the Planning Commission, which is wild because we're the Planning Commission, right? But that is how it works. But once that is something that is adopted, the amendments to actually implement that plan in the code and comprehensive plan, zoning map, comprehensive plan map will all need to be approved by both the Planning Commission and City Council. So that will be, I think, a little bit more involved part of the process for the Planning Commission compared to other bodies. So yeah, of course, the Planning Commission will be involved with earlier phases, visioning, goals, objectives, concept alternatives, and things like that, but really going to work here to refine that sort of code language and the implementing language that will then need to be adopted about a year after the plan is adopted. So I've kind of described the sort of project schedule to a degree here. I think there are a lot of things that we will be coming to the Planning Commission about, not necessarily everything here, but this really gives you a rough sense of how we'll work through the project. Hope to have that final framework plan adopted end of 26, early 27, and have the amendments to implement everything adopted before the end of 2027. So that's something that does somewhat align with our timeline within the housing production strategy, which would see us completing the quote-unquote rezone land strategy at least by the end of 2027, and some midterm implementation item for us there. So that would see that coming to fruition, but of course it'll go much quicker than you would think for a 2+ year project. And yeah, next steps for the Planning Commission specifically, as I mentioned, on August 25th, we'll have a work session to talk more specifically about the public involvement strategy for the project and talk about some of what the consultant team came up with specifically for different sort of engagement touch points that we've identified along the way. And we'll also have a work session before the end of the year in December to talk about vision, goals, objectives, and opportunities and constraints, sort of presenting the results of our initial analysis of sort of our site analysis and existing conditions, and sort of transitioning into a larger vision at that point. For both of these items, we're going to be doing, meetings of the CAC, meetings of the TAC, public events, et cetera. So there will be a lot of other ways for folks to get involved, but this is specific to the Planning Commission here. And then we will be coming to you in 2026, talk about the alternatives, talk about the draft plan. It would be, again, adopted before the end of the year, ideally. And then in 2027, we would have a lot more specific conversations about the code language. And yeah, I moved relatively quickly there. I didn't want to, belabor anything, but I'm happy to answer questions. I'm glad that I was able to at least give you an overview and orientation on this project. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate you running us through that. I had a question around the sort of the 2012 plan and then the subsequent repeal. I know there was a hyperlink in the draft memo, but I didn't actually click through it yet. But does the city still have archives? You may not know the answer to this, sort of the discussions around the adoption of it in 2012, and then also why it was repealed 2 months later? Can we go do that homework?
Yeah, I mean, we have that well documented. I think, there's a lot of this was political, of course, as most folks, I guess, are somewhat aware. I think that ultimately there was an election held, and there were new councilors that came on board and decided that they didn't want to continue the same direction as the previous council, more or less. I think that was the the same mayor, if I'm not mistaken, although I could be wrong. But essentially, there was a change of city council politically that was elected, and of course, they were elected following this relatively controversial adoption of the plan and urban renewal plan for the Foothills area. A lot of discussion of the streetcar was intermingled with that. I think there was a lot of community pushback to the potential for that streetcar extension to come to Lake Oswego, more or less, and to have the Portland streetcar come here. And I think a lot of the discussion was centered around that. There was, of course, a lot of discussion about density and just what's appropriate for this area as well. I think in some ways conversation has evolved from then, but of course, I think it's helpful to at least kind of get a good sense for what happened and why. So if there's, any, I'm not sure if it would be a memo, but there could be some ways to, at least for the future, clarify a little bit more of that and document that a little bit better for your benefit and reference.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
But I mean, you, of course, identify a very, very important piece of all this work, which is that, this is something that was a very controversial project previously. Again, this was a project that was initiated by property owners in the district. So the fact that the city is really wanting to take the lead with this, get going on this, and has the explicit support of city council is a big sort of difference here. And that they've wanted us to be proactive about this work. So I do think that we have a better starting point in that sense, at least. We have a little bit more of a, we're not developers that are hoping to make a buck on this property. We are wanting to, do this kind of the right way as a city and think about this in, the context of all the different city policies that we care about, including housing, parks, access to these areas. I think in particular transportation access will be a huge piece of this. It is not, I'm not sure if folks in this room have really visited this area, but it's not easy to access. It's not clear how to get there necessarily. So, that will be a huge piece of encouraging any redevelopment in this area, is just kind of figuring out what the transition between downtown and this Foothills neighborhood should be and how folks would get here on foot. And really, trying to connect. There may be a desire for downtown to sort of extend into the Foothills neighborhood. I don't want to presume that, but to at least make sure that there's a strong connection between those two areas in the future. Physical sort of transportation access type of connection. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of challenges and issues that we'll have to work through on this project, but I think we're feeling good that we actually have more control of this process and have the ability to go out and do the community engagement that we think is required to get to the right place.
Great, thank you.
Without sounding too naive, I guess I would say that.
Anyone else comments? James, I think you're on Zoom, but we can't see you, so let us know if you have any comments or questions.
Doesn't look like it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. That'll take us to item number 8 on the agenda, other business.
Well, first things first, I had mentioned this to you informally, but just wanted to mention that we do have a remedy to the issue that I had presented last time related to refreshments after meetings. Another thing that occurred at that meeting last week, City Council meeting on the 17th, was the adoption of a resolution to establish a new city policy for refreshments that essentially allows us to continue our previous practices. So anyway, we are allowed to do that, which is nice because we unfortunately are saying goodbye to a planning commissioner today, to Commissioner Rigby. We do have some refreshments for us later, but I want to take at least this opportunity to, I guess I'd usually go around and make it official, but hand you city blanket and your DSA Distinguished Service Award here. Thank you. Absolutely, yeah, and we, I just want to say, it's been a pleasure having you on the commission. It's really, it's great to have somebody that has a really distinct opinion on things and has sort of opinions that are outside of maybe the majority of what is on the commission, but you're able to present them in a really strategic way, and you're able to present them in a way where you're really amenable to solutions and looking for ways to solve problems and looking for common threads. And it's unusual, and we'll miss it. So just wanting you to know we appreciate your perspective, and particularly the way you worked with others and had really actionable ways to advance your thoughts. So thanks. Yeah, I don't know if you'd like to say anything else, but I just, yeah.
Well, thank you, Eric.
Yes.
I appreciate that. It's been it's been an interesting couple of years here. Seeing people come and go from the Planning Commission, and issues come and go. But I guess it looks like we're still kind of on the state compliance new rules track is still going strong. So I imagine that was the HB 2001 stuff was sort of coming into force when I came in, and it looks like that track is not going to abate anytime soon. But yeah, I just I encourage our current commissioners and those in the future to make thinking about what would make residents advance their interests the top priority, and keep that in mind.
Thanks, Commissioner Rigby. It's been a pleasure serving alongside you now for a few years, and really appreciate your time, because this is a big time commitment. You always came prepared, and that was really appreciated. You always knew the materials and had comments to say that were on point. So I appreciate your time and service.
Thank you. And if I can just echo Eric, appreciate your ability to engage with diverse perspectives. And it's really, I tell people I'm on the Planning Commission, they always say, "Ugh, how is that for you?" And I say, it's a really great experience, great group of people. So thank you.
Absolutely. So yeah, we, obviously it's unfortunate to say goodbye to Commissioner Rigby here, but we will have a new commissioner starting in July. So actually, Boards and Commissions orientation is tomorrow. So we will have somebody on board at least as a replacement, but big shoes to fill. So more about that basically in the near future here. But yes, very much appreciate everything that you've done for the commission. And I guess you technically served 2 half terms, but it makes up a full term. So anyway, we appreciate everything, and we'll have some refreshments afterwards because we can, more or less, just taking advantage of that. Yeah. And yeah, I guess I can do a schedule update, I guess, if you don't mind me just kind of getting into it. So yeah, I just want to mention we are going to cancel the meeting on July 14th, trying to take a little bit more, trying to be a little bit more productive in the coming weeks. So as opposed to sort of sprinkling it out through a longer period of time, we're going to have more than one item in the work sessions after that. So on July 28th, we are planning to talk about fair housing policy specifically as a part of the housing production strategy, one of the strategies that we have committed to do this year. So we'll talk a little bit more about specifically what that language looks like. We had a presentation on that earlier this year, but just to kind of move that forward and advance that conversation, we'll have a work session. We'll also have the first work session on the tree regulation amendments that Director Monalou has been working on for a little bit now. So she will be coming to you, and that will be the first work session we've had to discuss this. Just channeling my inner Evan Boone. These don't all relate to the Community Development Code, so they might be, she might be talking about some proposed amendments that are to other elements of the city code, but we absolutely want to involve the Planning Commission in that work, and she needs input from the Planning Commission. So that will be the first opportunity for her to get that. And yeah, the following meeting would be on August 11th. I think probably the biggest piece here is that we opted to push back the home occupation standards hearing just to make sure that we could basically pick up your input and make sure that we were doing it in a way that makes sense internally, and that all the other folks in the development review department had a chance to look at and make sure that there's no sort of potential issues with that text, basically. But we got a bunch of great input from folks, and we just want to take a little bit of time to make sure that we're not rushing that through. So anyway, I think we should be able to come forward on the 11th. No problems. We probably could have made the 28th work, but just we aren't dealing with a deadline, and we just didn't want to have to pick up your input in like 3 days to get the notice out. So yeah, and so anyway, on the 11th, we'll be holding that hearing, and then we'll be holding a work session dedicated to the code audit and amendments strategy within the HPS. So that is, as you might imagine, a very large sort of potential item. It could be a lot of work. We are going to apply for a grant from Metro, similar to what we did for the Foothills work for that project as well. And we'll have Evan Franstead in here to talk about that work. He'll be the project manager for that. So yeah, that'll be on the 11th, and then on the 25th, as I mentioned, I will come in and talk to you about public involvement for Foothills, and we'll have the findings for Michael's home occupation projects. Yeah, that takes us at least through the end of August.
Okay, thank you. And that was the last item on the agenda, so we're adjourned.